Hello, this is Rachel from 7 in All, and in today's video I am bringing to you a detailed review on Gentle and Classical Sequence 1. I'm going to be sharing what we used and what we didn't use from this program, how we adapted it, how I made it work for us, and I'll kind of be sharing some of my tips on implementation and resources we used along the way. For the record, I am an affiliate with Gentle and Classical, and I will leave my affiliate link down in the description below. If you're interested in purchasing from them, you can also just download the free teacher's guide for Sequence 1 from their website. I will link to their free teacher's guide. There is a complete bundle that you can buy with the student notebook and the cards as well, but you can actually see a detailed look inside the teacher's guide and just download that PDF for yourself. I do have the digital bundle. It does not normally look like this. It looks a little bit prettier. This is how my local print shop prints books. Now, what is Sequence 1? Sequence 1 is kind of a master plan for the school year. It has many subjects covered: history, literature, spelling, Bible, geography, grammar, catechism, and beauty subjects, including poetry, art and composer study, and more, if you incorporate every element. Now, I suspect that most people using this probably won't be incorporating every single element, at least not to a full extent. You totally have the freedom to look at this as a menu and customize as needed to fit your family. And that is one thing that drew me to the program, was its flexibility, as well as the vast amount of picture books it uses, because of course I love that. I love books. I love reading to my kids. That was a big draw as well. So I want to go through kind of each subject area and address what resources you have from Gentle and Classical, what guidance you have from Gentle and Classical on that subject area, and then how we implemented it. So I will put in timestamps that will divide this video by subject area. If you look inside the teacher's guide, you'll notice that each week is basically laid out on just a 2-page spread for a unit. There are 36 units in the program, and you just have a quick 2-page little big picture glimpse at all the topics or readings for that week. So this isn't 100% open and go. You can look at this 2-page spread and you can decide what pieces you are going to use and when those are going to fit into your week. The first subject area I will go over is morning virtues, which is your morning menu, kind of covering your riches subjects. And the morning virtues are sold in issues through Gentle and Classical, and they recommend going through 6 issues in a year. We are coming close in the last few weeks of our school year, and we will be finishing up our 6th issue right around then. So we pretty much followed that plan. I'll show you what it looks like to have a morning menu. So this is their Hope one that we did in the fall. They have a little affirmation reading basically about what hope is. We have a hymn, My Hope is Built on Nothing Less. Catechism questions, we did not use these. There are different catechism questions included in Sequence 1. Bible verse reading, we did do the Bible reading. There are 2 poems. I enjoyed these poems, and I did read these poems to my boys and kind of talk through and teach them. But my oldest is in 1st grade, and these are not really 1st grade level poems, so we did not do a whole lot with these poems for this year. To Hope by Charlotte Smith, yes. This is a beautiful poem. If you look at it, the vocabulary is at a very high level. This is more of a middle to high school poem if you were going to do deep analysis or performance of this piece, not a 1st grade poem. There's also folk songs to learn. Then there are also art prints for the painters that you are studying. And this one was Winslow Homer. So you have 4 paintings by Winslow Homer that you get to study, and there's little notes on the back of each painting just to give it some context, and discussion questions. Very little, very minimal, but you could also, there's a short biography of Winslow Homer to read in the guide for morning virtues, as well as a short biography of the composer that you're learning about. So those are the richest subjects, and we did not fully implement every element that is part of morning virtues. They also have suggested read-alouds. I did not do any of the morning virtues suggested read-alouds. I did read-alouds that were more targeted at 5 and 6-year-olds. The read-alouds they suggest, I'm familiar with many of those books. They're great books, but they are at a higher level. They aren't really the first chapter books I'd be reading with a 5 or 6-year-old. I really enjoyed incorporating hymn study with my boys this year. We sang our hymns, we did some art projects related to the hymns, we went through and discussed what does this mean? What does this mean that we're singing? So we didn't just sing it, we discussed it, and as we kept singing it, I would review and I would ask questions on some of those same points that I had taught. Hey, I explained last week what this word means. Now, do you remember? Can you tell me what this word means? What is the theology that's happening here in this song? So we really enjoyed that. We did some with the folk songs as well. Very light on the poetry, just because of the age of my boys. And we really enjoyed the paintings and artists that we got to study, as well as listening to the music by composers. Next, for science, they suggest that you use gentle and classical nature and just go through one of those programs as part of your year. We did not do that this year. We have already gone through gentle and classical nature 1 and 2, volume 1 and 2 in the past. We did a different science this year. For Bible, the 2 key elements are catechism, and you're working through the book Theology, which was introduced in Gentle and Classical Primer. So we have already done Gentle and Classical Primer, started Theology then, and are just continuing with the book, as well as having catechism questions on our memory statement cards here, questions and answers. The recommended storybook is the Alfred Rex Bible Storybook, and we are reading through New Testament stories in this sequence 1 year. This is a big Bible storybook with these engravings, old engravings throughout. I will note that some of the engravings can be a little bit graphic. I think notably one where they are putting John the Baptist's head on a platter. Now for my boys' dynamic, they have really enjoyed these illustrations. They find them quite fascinating. I don't have kids that will be disturbed by the more serious nature, and the Bible itself is actually a graphic book if we read the whole thing. So that didn't bother me, but just a note in case that is a concern for you. The next portion is additional literature, is what they call it. And this was really just short stories that we can read, and we worked these into our morning time over breakfast. We are reading through 50 famous stories retold by James Baldwin. They're just very short, very kind of common knowledge type stories. I've actually never read this book before, but the vast majority of the stories were somewhat familiar. They're just kind of well-known stories within Western culture, I would guess. The story of William Tell, the story of different kings and stuff, like kind of semi-legendary, semi-historical stories, depending on the story. Then we also had Aesop's Fables and another book of fables that are just really short, quick. You just have one a week, very easy to work in. Then under that additional literature section, she has you reading a tall tale or folk tale once every 6 weeks. And I thought these were really fun. My boys, of course, love these. These are just fun tall tales to read. And I actually wanted to do more with folk tales, so I added in more because one every 6 weeks. We love books, we love reading. So I just used that as a suggestion and added my own books on top of it. This was a volume of American Black folk tales by Virginia Hamilton that we read through. And I also have a volume of Native American folk tales by Joseph Bruchac that were great, just short folk tales that were very easy to weave in to our weeks. Next, she has a language section, and the language section is also represented on the memory cards, which I do really appreciate the design of these memory cards. They just have simple little diagrams to help you remember. Hey, plural means there's more than one of something. 2 or more make something plural. We're learning basic grammar concepts. There were also spelling lists and sight word lists as well that you can be working on. Now I will say we did not end up using these all that much. Although I like them, I thought that they were really nicely designed. I was using sequence 1 mainly for my first grader, and he's a little bit trending on the advanced side in spelling and a little bit trending on the advanced side in grammar as well. We've been doing first language lessons, which she does recommend, but he was progressing pretty quickly through first language lessons, and he just didn't really need the extra review. He just didn't really need the extra spelling at this point. So I kind of dropped it after a while just because it was redundant for him, while for my second son, who does join in with us sometimes, it was just over his head. He's really just trying to learn basic CBC words. He's in pre-K. He was 4 for most of the year that we've been doing this program. So that was too challenging for one and not enough challenge for another. So that was one element I did drop. Next up, we have US geography. Now the big goal with Sequence 1 and the US geography portion is that you're learning all 50 states and capitals this year. You are reading through a 50 states book. One of the elements is that you're doing a student notebook. Just do some little notebooking work based on the facts book you're reading about the 50 states. You also have a card that you can use for finding the states. And I have these beautiful, if I do say so myself, these beautiful state flashcards that my sister painted that show some symbols of each state. So we've got Idaho right there, Juneau, Alaska. So we had these flashcards, we have the notebooking, we're reading books about the 50 states, facts about each state, and my son really enjoyed that. He enjoyed all these elements, but where I really started to click for him on the memorization element was when we started adding 2 things, which were 1, songs. And this was inspired by my mom. She's like, hey, you're learning the 50 states. You gotta use the 50 states and capitals songs. And she remembers all those songs from teaching states and capitals to all of her 7 kids. So she just started singing them, and then I was like, oh yeah, I started singing them. And by using a US map and singing the states and capitals songs with my son, he actually mastered the states really quickly after that. I felt like using the songs really made it go a lot faster. Then we also added in Cetera, which I can link to the website down below, but Cetera is just a free website that has basically endless geography, game drill type things. So I would set up the computer for him and let him find all the 50 states. Or after he had learned the capitals, locate all the 50 capitals, and you just gotta click on the state and everything. And he doesn't do much with computers, but you know, kids, they do get very excited to use a computer and complete their little geography quiz on the computer. So for me, that was a very good element to, okay, let's use this little computer tool. And it was very motivational, and he mastered those quickly. And we've actually moved on now to learning the provinces of Canada and starting to branch out into more countries of the world, just using maps, songs, and Cetera. Next, beyond just US geography, there's also a world geography element, and I really appreciated that. Even if a big focus of the year was US history and US geography, I don't like to leave the rest of the world out of our year and just be solely focused on the US. For me and for my family, it does make sense, and that is a value for me to always just be incorporating world geography. Now, for our kindergarten year, we had done Around the World in picture books from Beautiful Feet Books, and you can see my review videos on that, but I had kind of been left feeling like there's something missing, or the approach there didn't really connect with me. So I was excited to try something different. And so what Sequence 1 recommends is to use 3 of their On Mission magazines. So these are magazines published by Gentle and Classical Press, using 3 of these over the course of 1 school year. So you're in 1 magazine for 12 weeks, and you're just slowly reading through the articles, and you can add on, and they give you suggestions for adding on. They also have some printables that come with these magazines that have coloring pages or maps, or just simple little printables to add on. And I added videos, and I found a book or 2 from my collection or from the library to add to this. And I really enjoyed this. Coming out of spending 12 weeks with Ethiopia or 12 weeks with Vietnam, I feel like we actually learned something about Ethiopia, something that stuck with us and that genuinely helps you to understand the country. I feel like we really learned something about Vietnam, and it was easy. It was not hard. It did not take a whole lot of prep. It was usually quite easy to implement. We got our food, our injera bread right there. But I was quite satisfied with this, and the way we implemented it in our homeschool was we just had 1 day a week. We were doing our world geography day in place of our history. So we had a steady 3 days a week where the big deal, what we're reading these long, chunky picture books about, is history. And then 1 day a week we had our world geography day where we would be reading an article from this and maybe reading another picture book if I had one, watching a video about the country. And so over the course of 12 weeks, we have 1 day a week where we're learning about Vietnam. So we did Vietnam, Ethiopia, and we're currently doing Greece. They did not recommend these countries specifically. You can just pick which 3 countries you want to do. And I just purposely picked ones that were on different continents so that we could kind of be in different parts of the world. And I also incorporated notebooking with this because we had started a country notebook at the beginning of kindergarten, and there's more pages in the notebook, so we've just been adding to our notebook as we've gone through that year and continuing to build that geography notebook. And the last subject area I will address is the history section. Now, the way the history is organized is that you kind of have one big topic that you're covering for 2 units or 2 weeks. So the War of 1812 was the second war between America and Great Britain and was caused by trade disagreements. Or in 1803, the United States, led by President Thomas Jefferson, purchased the Louisiana Territory from France. So one key idea, one main idea that's kind of the theme of your unit, and then you have picture books that you are reading to go along with that unit. And these picture books are not, just sit down and read it in 5 minutes. Some of these are quite meaty picture books. This one is George versus George, which is pretty long, very vividly illustrated book on the American Revolution. A lot of details in here. And she does give suggestions like, hey, this is a longer book. Maybe you just want to read portions of it. As it turns out, my first grader discovered a great fondness for historically and specifically historical battles during this year. So we read every single word of this, and he has also pored over this book in his free time since. So the longer books were not a problem for us, but do keep in mind, if you're coming from primer, or if you did primer with your children at a younger age, the amount of reading in sequence 1 definitely might feel a little bit like a leap, depending on the age of your kids, depending on how much attention span they have. Because when we did primer, I definitely felt like this is not much reading, and my kids wanted more and they needed more. And so we did add on a lot of extra books. I did add some books to sequence 1, but I did not add as much because there is a lot more reading in this level. Also, something that I have learned and grown in my own homeschool journey is, yes, they have a book list, but I didn't necessarily stick to the book list 100%. I looked at the topic and I was like, hey, well, if I find a different book that I like better on a certain topic, I'll use that book. So for example, this was one substitution I made. We have a Columbus biography by Demi. This wasn't strictly in the book list, but this is a really good book, an introduction to Columbus. I've appreciated the style of some of the Demi biographies. So we included this. And then this was a completely extra book I added on because we were doing this unit on explorers. I was like, well, we've got a book on Columbus. Why not have a book on Magellan too? And so I added a book on Magellan. And this was another very long and meaty text, but really interesting, really fascinating approach to learning about Magellan. So that's something I encourage you to do, that, hey, the book list is not a law. You could definitely mix it up, use authors that, hey, I like this author's style, I like this illustrator's style, or hey, I already have this book on my shelf, or hey, my library already has this book on the shelf. Like, it's not a law that you have to get this exact book. You can adapt as needed. But plenty of the books on the book list are fantastic suggestions. This one is Marguerite Makes a Book. We're learning about this comes in when we're kind of learning about the transition with Gutenberg and the transition from hand-created books to the printed book. And this is also a long, meaty book. Beautiful illustrations, really fun. I love using curriculum that gives me an excuse to buy books like this and have books like this that I can come back to again and again. So we deeply enjoyed using that element of this curriculum of just reading really good historical picture books and enjoying those. And that wasn't the only thing we did. What she does include as well is a student notebook, which has suggested activities. So I would glance through the suggested activities list, pick out some suggestions. We actually did a couple of really fun things, like building an actual model of the Jamestown Fort. So we did some hands-on activities like that. There's drawing and narration, kind of journaling that you can do in here, as well as some just different activity pages. So inventions by Leonardo da Vinci. There's not a lot of pages. There's not a lot of these, but there is usually one type of activity page per unit. And look at that. One little activity page with some variety, and then there's some copy work and then drawing pages that you can do as well. I also had my son beginning a history notebook, and I would use some printables for that, for cannons or soldiers that he wanted to color, and just different printables, as well as writing down some of his narrations in a separate just spiral notebook. We also began our history timeline, and this is a book that's going to build over years, so there's not all that much in it yet. Let me see. Look, we got some presidential portraits, and I just printed off the public domain presidential portraits. Let's see, where do we have other pages? Okay, then back in time we have our Ferdinand Magellan and Martin Luther, 95 Theses. We have Gutenberg and Christopher Columbus. I loved having a history timeline book when I was a kid, so I've loved beginning to build this, and I'm excited to see how it continues to grow. All right, that is our experience with using Sequence 1 for my oldest son's first grade year. I did have a pre-Ker, and he joined us a little bit. You know, he's there, he's around, but a lot of this I would not see as something that was really beneficial to him necessarily. A lot of it was over his head, but a lot of it was really meeting my first grader where he was at and sating his curiosity for history, and his desire to, you know, dive into these books and just gobble up all this information. So I am glad that I did not wait for my younger son to become old enough to appreciate this. You know, we've got plenty of years ahead of us. We can come back to these books again, and that is something I would suggest for those of you with firstborns who are very eager learners. You don't necessarily have to wait on the younger siblings to be ready to just go ahead. As for what we are doing for next year, we won't be doing Sequence 2 because at the moment there is no Sequence 2. We will be doing something else, and you can check out my second grade curriculum plans for the answer to that question. All right, if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below and I will do my best to answer them. All right, bye.